Hello and welcome to Generation Cult. I'm your host Dhyana, and what you're about to hear is a live show that we recorded on stage in front of an audience in San Francisco on June 26th at a performance venue called The Lost Church. The program we put on was titled Children from Cults. Authors and experts discuss Osho and other sex gurus. Not only was it a live recording for this podcast, but it was also a literary event and book signing featuring 3 authors. So we have an extra long episode this time with 3 guests. We also had some questions from the audience. Some of them were mic'd, some of them weren't. So you can hear some questions better than others. I hope that everyone enjoys this episode that marks Generation Cult's Season 4 finale.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey everybody, welcome. Thanks for coming out to another evening here at the Old Lost Church. So mainly, I want to thank you all for coming out and supporting live performance. I can't wait to hear and learn tonight. Ready to get off stage. All right. So tonight, we have Children from Cults, authors and experts discuss Osho and other sex gurus. So, I would like to introduce your host for this evening, Dhyana Levey. Please welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. I'm Dhyana. I'm going to be your host and moderator for this evening. And we are going to be getting to know some fabulous authors and experts tonight. We have Sarito Carroll, who is celebrating the release of her memoir, In the Shadow of Enlightenment. We also have Anke Richter, who is having her first U.S. appearance. She is the author of Cult Trip. She is originally from Germany, but based in New Zealand, and we are lucky enough to have her in town right now. So we're going to get to know her a little better. And then we also have Janja Lalich, who is a cult expert. She has written a ton of books, appeared in many documentaries. You can hear her on many podcasts. She wrote the book Escaping Utopia, that focuses on children raised in cults. So that really, really fits with our theme tonight. We're going to be doing a couple of things with this evening. Again, we're celebrating the release of Sarito's memoir. So this is a literary event. We're going to be discussing books written by all of our authors here. And we also are going to be discussing the wider issue of children who grew up in cults, which is an issue that hasn't been discussed as much in the past. I feel like it is getting more attention now, but it certainly has not gotten as much attention as it should. So we're so happy that you came out here today. I also fit into that category. I grew up on a commune or cult myself, so that's where the interest in this topic came from for me. I host the podcast Generation Cult, which we are recording for right now. So thank you for being a part of a future episode of Generation Cult. So what we're going to do tonight is kick it off with a panel discussion. Then we're going to get to know each author. We're going to also open up to questions. So let's go. Okay, well, I wanted to start with what sounds like a really basic question, but it's actually a really controversial question because people have all sorts of opinions about this. And I wanted to talk about the language that we're using for this event. We used the word cult, and a lot of people have a lot of opinions about the use of the word cult. So would anyone here like to define cult? It's a loaded question. Sorry, Janja.
All right. So a cult for me has 3 basic characteristics. It's founded by someone who's considered charismatic, but is actually an authoritarian leader who expects all adulation and all obedience and all loyalty. That's the founder, who usually comes up with the belief system and then in some way begins to gather people around him or her. Secondly is the belief system, which I call a transcendent belief system. And what I mean by that is that it's a belief system that offers you the answer to everything, to the past, the present, and the future, right? So it is the be-all and end-all. And embedded within this belief system is the requirement that you have to go through a personal change in order to be eligible to be on this path to whatever promise that leader is offering you. It has nothing to do with religion. It can be political, it can be commercial, it can be about making more money, it can be about riding horses, I don't care. It can be about anything. But the belief system is what initially draws you to the group. And then the final characteristics are the control and influence mechanisms that are used within that group to get you to obey, to get you to conform, to get you to go along, to change the way you think, to change your behaviors, and to change your worldview. So I know that's kind of a long, convoluted answer, but that's, for me, what a cult is. And the word is controversial primarily because over the years, we have been fighting against people that we call cult apologists who don't want us to use that word and who say that we really just hate religion. And as I said, it's nothing to do with religion. I myself was not in a religious cult. So I'm one person, not everyone agrees with me, but I'm one person who believes it's important to use that word. Just like we call a gang, let's call a cult a cult.
I agree. I use the word cult in the title of my podcast, Generation Cult. And so I clearly don't have a problem using that word at all. What do the rest of you think about that?
Well, I struggle with the word because it's got such a negative connotation. And so it took me a long time to be able to actually say it without, I mean, I still even say it. It feels like, it's like a swear word, like a really dirty word, like I'm accusing people of heinous crimes. And yes, there can be heinous crimes involved, but it's not only that, because there's so many good, decent people who join these movements. And of course, a lot of the people who've read my book or posted, like reacted to my book online, I mean, they literally say commune, not cult. Like I get a lot of pushback because it's got such a bad connotation. And then I say, well, you need to look at the definition of a cult. You know, so I'm trying to bring it back to what the actual definition is versus the connotation that I feel like the culture has kind of come up with, because I think of the most extreme versions of things, but there's such a spectrum.
Yeah. So true. What about you?
I absolutely agree. We need to reclaim that word. Let's use it, but let's fill it with more meaning. I think there's so many stereotypes out there about cults, and especially people who end up in cults. And I still find it hard to say that I've been in a cult, and I'm a cult journalist who was dabbling in a cultic group while I was researching the abuse in another sex cult. I wasn't one myself. So this goes to show that even people who think they really know a lot about cults or they're really invested into finding out more about them can get hooked into something. And that's I think that one of the key things that people out there, please should understand, that everyone is susceptible to some degree. Maybe the three of us wouldn't have ended up or would never end up in a fundamentalist Christian cult. But look, I mean, you had no choice, Sarito, but Janja wasn't a political cult. I was in a sacred sexuality group that I still struggle to call a cult.
Right.
We need to reclaim that word and just give it more meaning and be clearer about what it actually is, so that people drop these misconceptions that people are weak and stupid and uneducated and lost and don't have a life. It's actually often the opposite. Cults want people that are well-connected, that have a high social standing, that are outgoing, that can obviously bring other people in, that give them the cult social capital. And everyone is vulnerable at some stage in their life for something that can land when it's the right timing.
Agreed.
I would also just like to add the point about the bad connotation. I think the word has a bad connotation because they've earned it. But we shouldn't spread the bad connotation onto the followers or the members.
Right, somehow we're bad, and so I feel like I'm
Right.
shaming everyone else that was involved, like, oh, look at you evil people who haven't seen the light. I don't want to be that judgmental. I want to have the compassion more, like, to...
No, I understand that. I think talking with people who are in a cult, you would never say you're in a cult. Because that'll just freak them out.
Yeah,
it wouldn't
send
work,
them in
right?
deeper, right? So you need a very sophisticated approach. So I understand completely what your point of view.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
People who end up in cultic groups are the ones who are actually looking for a better world and want to make it better, and they're often altruistic and they want to help others. These are all great qualities, and this is why I feel so passionate about this, because these qualities that are really needed in this world today get exploited by groups who promise something and then don't deliver that, but actually change you into someone you never wanted to be, and that's tragic.
Absolutely. And I had another language type question. What does it mean to be a child from a cult?
I guess I'll start because
Yeah.
I was a child in a cult.
Yes.
I think what it means to be a child of a cult is that just as you grow up in any society, you're in this society and that's all you know. And so you just go along with it. You learn the mores of the culture. Even if you sort of have questions internally, you tend to push them down because that's not what's being shown to you in the environment. And there's also the structure of the culture is not the same as the outside world, where there's actually all different individual sort of agencies, or even child protective agencies, or the police, or this and that. We don't all have it because we are in this one thing where there's one person saying it's a sort of a pyramid thing where this is the way it goes. And so we don't have secondary agencies or even grandparents or whomever to go to talk about our problems or our challenges. And at the same time, we're not being asked. We're not being asked, what do we need? What are we feeling? Where are we lost? How are we doing in school? Because we're not going to school, at least in my case. So there's no advocacy, and we don't know that we're missing the advocacy.
Yeah, in my case, I went to public school, but
Right.
So I had kind of a 50-50 type situation, but I still felt somewhat similar, somewhat shielded from certain things as well. So I do relate to that.
So I'm sure it's quite different depending on environment. But
Exactly.
like, for example, in our commune in Rajneesh, we were a 64,000 acre ranch in the middle of not nowhere, but almost nowhere. We certainly didn't have any money or any way to go anywhere unless the people in charge would send us to Portland for the day or something. And then when we were there, again, we were the chosen people and everyone else was, something's wrong with them. So we didn't, we looked down on them just because of how we were raised. The people in the outside world were not okay. And it took me years after the commune ended to not think of people outside as stupid and unconscious and, I shouldn't associate with them. So that meant I was extremely, extremely lonely because here I am thrown into the world and there's regular people who aren't the chosen ones, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the main, feature or important facet to look at in terms of children and cults is the developmental processes. All of us, when we're children, go through developmental stages. And if any of you have been in grad school or studied psychology, there's a guy named Erik Erikson who developed these theories about child development. And he has 9 stages, and each stage is a few years, like from birth to 3 years old. And in each of those stages, you're supposed to accomplish certain things, like you should be in a certain kind of environment that in that stage you develop trust or whatever it is, right? And once you achieve that, then you go on to the next stage. But when you're a child in a cult, you don't get to do that as you would have if you were in, quote, the outside world, the regular world, right? So all of it is orchestrated for you. So you're not really forming your own sense of identity. And the most important phase is the early teens, 13 to 15. That's when children are figuring out who they want to be, right? That's when, if you remember, maybe that's when you got a tattoo. That's when you got really rebellious. That's when you hung out with kind of the wild kids. And then you thought, I don't really want to hang out with them. You're trying to figure out who you want to hang out with, what you want to be, what you want to believe in. You're separating a little bit from your parents, right? That's a really, really important phase for self-development, for your sense of identity, who you are going to be. So again, if you're in a cult, you don't get to figure that out on your own. And so the stifling of the developmental processes is, in my mind, the most important thing that happens to children in cults, so that when they get out, the whole issue of identity and who am I and what do I believe and where do I go and where did I come from and how did I get here? It's like all a big mush because you never got to sort that out for yourself. And so that, I think, is the really one of the main tragic aspects of it. Not to mention the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, everything else horrible that goes on. But destruction of the developmental phases is really significant.
I love to add to that because this is really the groundwork for understanding all the follow-up problems that you've seen in your research. I've come across as a journalist with the dozens of former cult kids I've interviewed. I mean, some of these cults, and I'm just speaking broadly now, from Children of God to 12 Tribes to fundamentalist Christian cults, they're child torture cults. Yeah, that's child torture, what happens there, the physical, I didn't even want to say discipline, the physical punishment of children is often so brutal. Then there is often the neglect of children, like you've seen it in the Rajneesh Pura movement at Centrepoint, the sex cult in New Zealand that I've looked into, and lots of other groups where the parental authority is taken away and the kids are raised communally, and that comes with all sorts of issues of attachment and so on. Then often there's the neglect of their health needs. They don't get, they have terrible teeth. They never saw a doctor. They never had a vaccination. We know people who have severely disabled children or lost their parents at an early age because they never got the right treatment when either during birth or when they were sick and so on. So the consequences also then of kids who come out of groups who ended up in prostitution, in addiction. Maybe Sarito, you want to talk about that too? Sorry, it's getting a bit dark now, but it's a massive, unrecognized public health issue.
That's my line.
I'm quoting Janja Lalich here, right? Exactly. And you're absolutely dead right, Janja, because it's true and it's tragic. And there are kids living on the streets and because of having been raised in a cult.
Yeah, I guess I'll speak just about Rajneesh Pura. And I think it took me a long time to realize, I think we all thought we were okay, at least I did, because you don't know another reality. And so you come into the world and you're like, okay. But as it turns out, like many of my peers that I didn't know, because I was just so concerned about my own survival, and I was also so ashamed of my history that I didn't want to talk to people. So I just worked my ass off to try and fit in. But as it turns out, a lot of the people who were in the community were struggling. Many of us were almost homeless when we got out. We had no money, no education, and the hierarchy of needs, like we were just in survival mode. We didn't have a choice of let's go do this or let's go do that. It was like, where am I going to get my next meal?
Right.
And I was in that state for a while. And I know, having learned a lot more now about my peers, many were the same. They could barely get by. Many had fallen into addiction. There have been suicides, prostitution, suicides, and it's very hard to get out of that. And I can see how easy it is to get into that because we were not given the tools to function. And also all the adults were leaving and they're just, taking care of themselves. And the parents were already indoctrinated to be part of that group. So we weren't, most of us, or at least I wasn't, bonded very much. They treated us sort of like adults in the community. So when we come out, it's like I thought I could just be fine. And I learned really quickly that it wasn't like that. So we were not given any kind of preparation. And when you're in that kind of hardship, you turn to whatever you can do to survive, because that is a basic human instinct.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about your experience and your book and you. So, as you know, this is Sarito Carroll. She moved around a lot with her mother, and around the age of 9, they moved to an ashram in India, an Osho Sri Rajneesh ashram. And shortly thereafter, you moved on your own. It was before your mother got there, right? To Oregon.
Well, the commune in India sort of folded.
It folded.
Bhagwan, who was now known as Osho, he was called Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh back then. He moved to America. Kind of just sort of left, and we were all left there. So everyone dispersed back to their countries of origin. And it was shortly after that that his new secretary, Ma Anand Sheela, purchased a 64,000-acre ranch in Central Oregon, and that was going to be where our new commune was going to be built.
That's right. And if any of you have seen the documentary Wild, Wild Country, she was interviewed extensively in that documentary.
In that whitewash.
Yes, exactly, which I was just about to say. They left a lot of things out, which means you should really read Sarito's book.
I did not. Do any of you remember seeing any children in that documentary?
There were no children in that.
So our stories were not told, and that set me on fire.
You ended up moving there to what became Rajneeshpuram.
Yep.
And this was in Central Oregon. It was near a little town named Antelope.
Correct.
And you lived there from 9 to 16.
No, in America, I was 12 to 16. I
12
was
to
in India
16.
from 9 to 12.
9 to 12, my
Yep.
apologies. And then you ended up leaving at 16 and having to deal with the real world.
Correct.
And you ended up getting your education, you got multiple degrees, and you wrote this book. So the first thing I did want to ask you was, why now? What made you want to write this book now?
There's several reasons. I think I've wanted to write it since I was in my 20s. When I first I had to realize I was in a cult, which was very hard. Then I had to realize that I was sexually abused starting very young. Because it was so normalized, I didn't think of it as that. But I went to therapy, and the therapist is literally like, I can tell by your body language you've been abused, which is absolutely horrific because I wanted to be invisible. And the fact that it was apparent was a lot to process. And then I was in college and I was in English class, and I sort of had this epiphany, like, my story is crazy and I need to tell it. But firstly, I was very insecure. Like, I felt like an imposter when I was in college because I basically didn't go to school from third grade until college. And so I never thought I was good enough or that I wasn't skilled enough, I couldn't write, this and that. It was that, but I also think I needed to process a lot more. So it's literally taken me 40 years to actually write the book. And I'd say the impetus that finally got me to really go for it, because I'd started and stopped many times, was seeing Wild Wild Country and going like, holy cow, I know all these people, but this is not the whole story. And then COVID also came right after that, or just before that. I coincidentally ran into someone who, again, was, over the years, a lot of people from the commune sort of didn't take me seriously when I talked that I was sexually abused. And when I talked about my abusers, they're always like, oh, whatever. And so I was actually at someone's house who I hadn't seen for a long time, and she was introducing me to a guy and said, oh, so-and-so was with this guy, Milarepa, who is my main abuser, as well. His wife was with this guy as well, and I had such a strong visceral reaction. And they're like, why are you so upset? What are you making such a big deal for about this? And I just thought I was going to blow up. And at that point, I'm just like, I'm not taking this BS anymore. So it's between those two things. I then actually wrote a letter to my perpetrator, the main one. There's many perpetrators, don't get me wrong. The one who started it, my first, and he didn't respond. So that just fed my fire. Then it sort of started coming out on Facebook, and I started writing on there. And as all this was re-emerging, I was like, I'm writing my book now, and I'm going to tell it straight. Wow. No sugarcoating it.
Bravo.
It's a great book, can I just say? It's a great book. You should all read it. Yeah.
Thank you.
So what has the response been from the community you grew up in and from the public?
From the community I grew up with, there's still a lot of spiritual bypassing, or stonewalling, I'd say, is the main reaction. Just, you don't exist. And people who've been my friends for years just simply stop talking to me. Oh, I don't want to go to that negative place.
Wow.
Or they give no explanation. Or it's sort of like, well, I accept that there was sexual abuse, but that's just a few bad apples. It's nothing to do with the teachings. It's nothing to do with the guru. Or it's like, well, we respect your perspective, but you have to realize that Osho is still the most enlightened person to walk the planet since Gautama the Buddha. It goes on and on. But there are some from that community who truly see the whole picture, I think, and have been extremely supportive. And so as several people have sort of disappeared from my life, other people that I didn't know saw things more like I did have reemerged, including a couple of people here tonight. So thank you. It's been a tough thing, and a lot of sort of harassment on social media.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. I've kind of gotten,
People are mean.
People can be so mean.
Yeah. If you feel comfortable talking a little bit more about your experience in the community, it was described as sexually open in a good way. Mm-hmm. I would like to hear about how you experienced it as a teenager, as much as you would feel comfortable discussing it. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about this sexually free community that we heard somewhat positive things about in pop culture, I would say?
Yeah. Well, I think that perception too is because firstly it came out of the 70s when there was all the sexual revolution, so it was like, cool, we're free now. Mm-hmm. And this movement appeal to that population, especially people sort of looking for alternative way of life. And I also think once you're in a community or cult, you sort of adapt to the status quo. So I believe that there were probably many adult, especially women, who weren't actually comfortable, but you had to go along with it. But from a child perspective, again, it was the norm. And I think I have a line in my book saying once we developed, we had the power of the male gaze. Like that was our currency because we were budding young beauties, right? I can only speak really for the female perspective. I know that some of the boys were abused too, but I don't know their stories very well. So I'm just going to speak for the female perspective. And so it's this very open sexual culture. So you just feel like you have to fit in. And even though I had a lot of instinct inside, was like, this doesn't feel right. But I was so much longing for connection and affection. And so when these adult men started preying on me when I was 12 years old, I still had the romantic notion that it was love. And I wasn't really into the sex part, but that was the only way I could get affection, especially for men. Like I had female affection, but that was the only male affection I got. And the whole culture was such that we were supposed to be okay with it and go with it. And it was just normalized to have sexual relations with adult men. And most of us were sexual at very young ages and not with each other, with adults. And so I think as a female, a girl, I didn't even consider my peers. Like I thought they were too young, but I was the same age. But I was so sexualized and I was so used to the men, and the men were they were so open and so aggressive that the boys didn't have that same skill, at least that I came across, So in this free love thing where it's supposed to be so celebratory, it's sort of like it's too open for children who need boundaries.
Yes, it sounds like it. So this fell apart when you were 16, and you pretty much had to go into the real world. What was that transition like for you?
It took me years to realize that it was probably one of the most traumatic parts of my life. But at the time, again, you're in that survival mode. Basically, I had $300 that my mom gave me that I almost refused because I thought I was grown up. I go to Laguna Beach. There's stuff that's not in the book, but I was raped. I was almost homeless. I didn't know what to do. Some guy, it's just like I did not know what to do. I came across my perpetrators, two of them again, and realized that they actually didn't care about me. And I was going downhill really fast, didn't know what to do, didn't know how to interact with the general culture. I didn't know how to do small talk. I didn't know how to get a job. I didn't know where the sun rose or set, like just basic knowledge. I got my act together, though. I had $99 or $100 left to my name, and I got a plane to Boston from California and started getting temp jobs at legal firms because in Rajneeshpuram, I worked in the law office as a child, apparently for school credit because we didn't go to school. We had a thing called School Without Walls. So I made this sort of fake resume, and that was the beginning that I started getting back on my feet. And eventually I started my own cleaning business when I was like 17, and I started making enough money to pay rent. I was living in communal houses. And then eventually I met my grandparents who were academics and just hammered home I needed to go to college. And I was like, no, that's brainwashing, because that's what I had always thought, that education was actually a bad thing. It was like the societal conditioning that ruins you. But I have to thank them for pushing me. And eventually I graduated from college and got a normal job and the whole thing.
It's great.
Thank you.
Good for you.
Thank you.
It's fantastic. I'd like to open this up to a few questions
Sure.
from
Yeah, please.
the audience. If
Yeah.
anyone would like to ask
Yeah.
a question.
Sarita, it's lovely to meet you. I've watched some of the interviews you've done on YouTube about your book, but
Thank
it's
you.
obviously
Thank you.
different in person.
Thank you.
Two questions. I'm watching you use the word cult and commune seemingly interchangeably. So would you say that all communes, or all large communes, let's just say, as opposed to like homesteading or something, would be defined as a cult? No.
I don't think
Okay,
so.
I'm hearing. Okay.
Just because we don't know, we have to fit the characteristics that she laid out. I mean, in that way, we would say that the whole culture is a cult, you see, because it's still like there's all these different circles of connection, right? So I don't think I could say that.
Okay.
I think there has to be a charismatic leader. which we do have in our culture.
Yes, we do.
Charismatic, you call that charismatic?
Well, maybe we call it anti-charismatic. He's charismatic to some. Let's say influential. How about?
Yeah.
So I don't think so.
Okay,
I don't
that's
think
helpful.
so. Part of the reason I interchange is it's still so hard for me to use the word cult. I think that's part of it. I feel like community is a positive term about connection. And though this was a cult, it was also a commune. And there was connection and there was amazing people, very loving people who, most of them, I would say some of them were just purely pedophiles, but most of the people came there with the best of intentions, trying to make themselves better people, making a better world. So I still feel like it's hard for me to say the word cult. It hurts me. It brings up a lot of emotion for me. Yet it is the truth.
And if I could just add, I think it's important to think about it as the organization, right? The commune, the religion, the whatever, the organization, and then the descriptor of that organization is cult. You see what I'm saying? It's just like not every religion is a cult. It has to fit these certain characteristics, right? I mean, people want to say, oh, the Marines are a cult. No, the Marines might do certain things that are similar, but it's not a cult. It doesn't have all the qualifications. So I think flipping back and forth, I think when Sarito says commune, she's thinking more of the actual organizational existence,
The
right?
physical space,
The physical
even.
space, rather than the adjective that describes it, if we think of cult as an adjective in that sense.
Okay.
Thank you. And then my second question, what would one say to people that are still defending somebody like Osho?
It's so hard because my experience so far is that you can't penetrate. It's almost like an impossibility. The only thing I can do for myself is to disengage because they are not going to see the light because they do not want to see the light. And how I sort of describe it is like that there's scar tissue in their brain or in their viewpoint of the world. It's like they just cannot go there. It's like this skipping in the record. It's just not okay because that's their whole worldview. And people built their entire career on the Osho's name. And so they're exploiting Osho's name to make millions of dollars. And their image needs to be la, la, la. So if the cards get pulled from that pyramid, they will just fall to the ground. And they did know about the stuff. That's how it is. I mean, this is how most of these people in sort of more of a public position within the Osho movement deal with it. Oh, I didn't know about it. That's just the easiest way to deny and whitewash the experience of me and the others. And a lot of people also say, well, I had a great experience. Well, I'm sorry, but if we are the children of the commune, it is the responsibility of those in the commune to look out for us. So just because you had a great experience, that's not the point. That is so damn selfish. In essence, by going la, la, la and saying, I don't want to hear it because I didn't know it existed, is being complicit, in my opinion.
I would even add to that, if you had a good experience, well, then you're one of the lucky ones. You should even be more invested now to help those who didn't have a good experience. Yeah, of course, people have good experience in cults, otherwise no one would be there in the first place. It's not all bad, obviously. It feels pretty good when you're in there at first. You're on a high. You have amazing experiences, you meet new people, you think your life's changing, you see the light, or you've had this new program, or whatever it is, or you have your faith. And if you're lucky that you got away unscathed, well, then now that you know what it stood for and what it wasn't, I think it's so clear now with the Osho movement. And this is why there can't be any more denial. There can't be any more, oh, we didn't know that. Oh, that wasn't a wild, wild country. Well,
But there is.
There is now.
The problem is that
yeah.
even you say there can't, there is. And it's probably worse than ever, is all I can tell you. It's worse than ever because as I just tell you from my own experience, it's just sort of like, oh, I don't want to know about it, or that's too negative for me, so I'm not going to engage in this, or I'm going to leave that Facebook group because I don't want to see messages about this. And also it's like, well, that's on the physical plane and, you know, or even all the victim shaming, like, well, that's your karma, or you haven't worked it out, or you're too negative, or go do dynamic meditation. You just need to shake off your negativity. Or, I mean, just the list goes on and on.
I just want to add to this because I think what you're touching on relates to an issue that I find really troubling that Sarito knows. I guess a year or so ago, I was consulting with a group of women who grew up in Rajneesh from different parts of the world. I think there were 12 of us to begin with. Right?
Is there that many?
I think in the beginning, and then people kind of disappeared. But one of the main issues that we discussed in that group and that the women brought up was the inability to reconcile with their parents, because their parents had that attitude, like, I don't want to talk about it. Well, I had a good time. Well, I thought you were having a good time. I thought you would like being there, right?
You looked happy is the comment I get a lot.
You looked happy. And, oh, do we have to talk about that again, right? And so here are these women who are Sarito's age. Their parents are my age, right? And they're dying, which I will too one day. And so they feel like they can't come to any kind of resolution with their parents before they all just start dying off. And it's such a huge pain and such a huge source of angst for all those women, and from other cults as well. It's one of the issues I feel has never yet been talked about. And I didn't succeed, but I tried to get those women in that group to write something about this so that the public could become aware, because this is a huge part of that issue. And I think it's so important. And I know that parents were themselves, quote, brainwashed. They themselves were true believers. And so, okay, but then when it's over, you have to come to some sort of recognition that this is what it was and this is what your kid lived through. And you have to own up to it. And if you don't, you are complicit and you are a huge asshole. And so
It's very, very challenging. It's very, very challenging.
yeah. But I know so many survivors from other groups as well, child survivors, who just at some point say, I can't even talk to my mom anymore. I just can't. I'm not even going to try. I can't. I'm not going to see my mom anymore. And if we think about what a parent relationship means to us, that's hard. That's not right.
I'm no contact.
You are no contact.
Yeah.
I'm in contact with my mom, and it's very much like she's like, I'm 80. I want to have the best life I have now. I've suffered so much on your behalf,
No.
because you were troubled, but I don't want to go back there now. And because I still love her despite everything.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I've brought it up many times. As you know, I'm pretty feisty, so I have been with my mother too. But there's no budging, and so now I wish I could have resolution, but the best resolution I can actually have is to let her have her way,
Right.
and to not fight with her anymore, because it's been a battle my entire life. And so I'm trying to just have love for her, and it's hard because I would love resolution. I don't think it's possible. I mean, I think hopefully for some it is possible, but the best I can do is be the bigger person.
And you are.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question before we move on, and I think I saw that you
There
had a
was someone in the
question.
back. Oh,
Oh, and there was someone in the.
There's someone way back.
so
the back of
some
this-
couple guys back there.
Okay. Okay. Shout it out.
Thank you for being here. I saw the documentary like a lot of other people did about documentary. And the way Netflix kind of portrayed Sheila, well, she was like this anti-hero. What are your thoughts on who she really was and how Netflix portrayed her?
Okay. It's like I know too much, you see, and I have to be careful. Well, I think they glamorized her when she's actually a sociopathic person, and she's very charming. I mean, she's sort of like, she was almost like a secondary cult leader, because she actually had the authority a long time when Osho was in isolation, and so I think she really took on the power. But I feel like the way that Wild Wild Country portrayed it was almost like a positive thing. I feel like they didn't show her sort of sinister, dark stuff as much. Even though they're talking about these crimes, it was like almost like turned around to be like, wow, look how clever she was. And she was clever. She was a very intelligent person, very bubbly, influential. But I feel like somehow her charm seemed to always work on people. And I feel like it did in that documentary as well. Like her charm is sort of, she's just very skilled. I mean, that's a short answer. I could talk about her for hours, probably.
And everyone else who has questions, hold on to them. We're going to do more questions later. But we're going to move on to Anke and talk about her and her book. So Anke is an investigative journalist based in New Zealand, originally from Germany, having her first U.S. appearance. Her book, Cult Trip, came out through HarperCollins and is now being published in the U.S. And she researched 3 different sex cults around the world, and this was after having her own experience in a sex cult. Also, Anke started the D-Cult conference last year in New Zealand, which was a huge success, so she's already contributed a lot to the field, but we are going to talk a little bit more about her book, Cult Trip. I would like to first start with your personal experience. So you had your own experience first before you got into this whole research project. What got you into this?
Yes and no, because it kind of happened parallel at the same time.
Oh, okay.
I went to a New Age Neo Tantra festival in Byron Bay, and that's when I was hooked.
But and why did you go?
For lots of very personal reasons that I'm not sure if I want to lay them all out, but I was curious. I've been very cynical about all this stuff for many, many years, and then for some reason I went there. Oh, it was an assignment. It was an assignment for a magazine, but I was also really personally interested, but more with a cynical bent of, oh, this is probably not for me. And then something clicked. It was after an ecstatic dance, and something landed. I thought, I always want to be like this. I always want to feel this free and this ecstatic and this connected and look people in the eyes and have these kind of connections. And it became my new drug. I found it there. And at the same time, at the same festival, so this was parallel and not before really, at the same time, I met a woman there, also from New Zealand, Anke, who told me that she'd grown up in a former cult in New Zealand called Centrepoint. I'd never even heard about it. I'd already lived in New Zealand for like 10 years, but never heard about Centrepoint, and that it existed in the 80s and 90s and was New Zealand's largest intentional community. It was started by this guy, Bert Potter, self-acclaimed therapist, who had come to Esalen and then to Pune, Bhagwan's ashram in India, and learned his stuff there and brought it to New Zealand and started this commune based on the human potential movement teachings that he brought with him. And they had a very similar philosophy to what Sarito experienced in her commune around being sexually open. Basically, most monogamous relationships stopped for people who came into Centrepoint. And unfortunately, a large number, at least a third of the children were sexually abused. And they manufactured ecstasy on the property and took that in group experiments with teenagers as young as 12. Yeah. So for little New Zealand, where not really much happened, this was a huge scandal, a huge story. A dozen people went to jail. The commune was raided twice by police. And people ended up in jail. There were court cases, but all this happened before the internet. So unless you were over 40 or so, you would have never heard of Centrepoint. I certainly hadn't. And then I met Anke, and she told me she had been the commune concubine as a teenager when she moved there with her mother, with her single mother and her siblings. And I was fascinated. And then a few months later, this guy, Bert Potter, died, who'd founded the whole thing. Centrepoint had long been over for like 15 years by the time I met Anke. And he died, the founder died he had Alzheimer's, he was in a dementia home. Anyway, the fact that he died.
Syphilis?
Who knows, but... And I mean, he was a serial sexual abuser, and so were many men, including his son, at this commune, and some of the women as well. And then he died, this cloak lifted for a lot of the former children, and Anke was one of them. And then through her, I suddenly understood what this was, and I was fascinated by it. I thought, wow, this is a really big story, actually. And I've written a few books before, and I thought, wow, why has no one in New Zealand written a book about Centrepoint? And so here was the outsider from another country, really, who never even heard about this place before, and I set out to write a book about it. My gateway was Anke, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. So all these things that we've been talking about here tonight that I now know and understand, and that Janja has studied, and you were a whole podcast about, Dhyana, this was all completely new to me. I wouldn't say I was naive, but I was just ignorant about the dimension of cultic harm for children and what that meant, and I got lost in this whole labyrinth of factions of former members of the former children, also some claiming, like in Sarito's case, look, I had sex when, lots of men when I was 13, but, it was okay. It hasn't harmed me. And all these loyalties to their family members also who went to jail. In most families, there were perpetrators and victims. It was this massive cesspool of unprocessed trauma. Yes, there had been court cases, but it had never been really dealt with on the level of reconciliation between the parents and the children. There was all this shame about being from Centrepoint for a lot of the children. They would never tell anybody where they grew up because for the outside world it just stood for pedophilia, and it just sounded sordid. And who wants to talk about this over, at a dinner party when people ask where you're from or so? So I was fascinated by the story, and I bitten off more than I could chew. I got into it as a journalist, trying to capture what it was, and I met more and more people, and some of the nicest, friendliest, most approachable people were some who'd done the worst stuff there, and some of the most difficult ones who freaked out, who had real issues with the whole project, were the victims. It became really, really difficult as a journalist for me. I was on my own. I didn't have a newsroom around me. I didn't even have an editor at the time because she had left the publishing house that had signed me up. And after 2 years, I had legal threats. I was really lost in this labyrinth of different versions of the truth. It was so difficult. And after 2 years, I had absorbed so much vicarious trauma that I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I had to stop the book and gave up on it and thought, this is it. I can't do this anymore. This is too big for me, for one person to hold. And then I was on a bit of a mission as well. I really crossed the line from just being the observer to wanting some of these adults to understand what they were responsible for, because I met so many people in denial who could just explain it all away, and they still had their good lives. And I met these really broken women and some men a bit younger than me who'd been there as kids and teenagers, and they never really got their life together. And there was one girl, the girl in the caravan, I call her in my book, who basically barricaded herself at Centrepoint in a maze of junk in a caravan at 11 years old, so men wouldn't come to her at night. Yeah, and meeting her had changed my life, and it changed her life, because I was the first person when she was almost 50 who she told her story to. And she had set such high hopes in me telling her story, and then I couldn't in the end and gave up on the book and only wrote the making of it all, tip of the iceberg, for a New Zealand magazine. But then 2 documentaries came out of this, and I mean, all these years later, there is a book now where all of this is in there too, but it's like the resurrection of the book. I couldn't write back then, and then I wrote another book many years later, when I was approached again by HarperCollins, and at that time had done a lot more occult research, and I could pull it all together. And I found this common thread of the sexual abuse in these very different looking groups, because there was Centrepoint, which has so many parallels to what you experienced, Sarito. And I mean, I read your book last year, and this is years after, 2 years after my book has come out, years after I did my Centrepoint research, and I read your book, and the penny dropped from me. I thought, this is like Centrepoint.
I just read your book now. I didn't even know that what Centrepoint was, and I just read it, and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, right. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
but the parallels, right? And then the other cult is a yoga cult in Thailand called Agama Yoga, and is linked with the Misa cult, which some of you might be familiar with, and then also a very fundamentalist Christian cult in New Zealand, where also there's a big emphasis on sexuality. This is a very long answer to your question about what was I doing in my own explorations at the time. So while I think the reason why I was also drawn to Centrepoint at the time and thought this is a story that I'm really curious about is because I was dabbling. And then I started doing courses with ISTA, International School of Temple Arts, and found that this was really great, and I loved it. And then I thought, I realized that the people who went into Centrepoint all these years ago, they probably weren't that different. They probably wanted something similar. They also wanted an open relationship, and they wanted to do some kind of therapy, and they wanted to be in a community, and they wanted to have blissful, ecstatic experiences with each other, and all this good juju that I thought I was getting from the group that I was dabbling in. And this is why I was so fascinated by Centrepoint, because I thought, how did this utopian dream that was started there in the late 70s in New Zealand turn into something that was such a nightmare on so many levels for so many people, with such a long-lasting shadow? So I don't write a lot of my book about my own experience in ISTA. I am critical about it and open about that. And actually, since the book's come out, I've become a lot more vocal, because a lot more activism has happened in that field. And so I've been following that, and I've been supporting that. And I've instigated a documentary about ISTA that's coming out next year. So that's still a big part of my sort of own unpacking of yeah, this is what I was into, and it really informs me in many ways, even though it was on such a small level compared to your cult experience, Janja, or your cult experience, Sarito. It was very minor, and I wasn't harmed, and it didn't take over my whole life, and it was on a low level, and still it gives me some really good insights into how hard it is to untangle yourself.
So what's the takeaway if someone reads your book?
I think one of the takeaways is what I said in the beginning. Everyone is susceptible. And the other one is the other one, I hope, is the accountability. And look, I come from Germany, where this whole topic of, we call it Vergangenheitsbewältigung. It's a long German word with umlauts, and it means coming to terms with the past. And this is crucial for me. It's not like it doesn't matter what you did when you did bad things in your commune or in your cult or in a fascist society, right? Were you the bystander? Were you the enabler? I'm not excusing any of those roles or of these things that happened. But for me, the moral thing that I think we need to talk about is, what are people doing now that they know what it was and they've been confronted with it, and it's clear and the facts are on the table, and there are books like Sarito's and there are podcasts and there are documentaries, and there's no looking away anymore, and there are proper media investigations. What are you doing now to make the wrong right? And that's what I feel passionate about. I basically want to bring more compassion towards the people who end up in cults, and not just shame them and ridicule them, but understand why we do this as a society, but also we're sitting here. But also be aware of the harm that you've caused in this context, and do something about it now. And so there's still so much work to do for the parents' generation to recognize, acknowledge what they were part of, and make some repairs, right?
And Anke's book, Cult Trip, is for sale, as well as Sarito's and Janja's. I wanted to mention that in case any of you are interested in reading any of these books we are going to be talking about tonight, or we are talking about. And one more thing before we move on, I did want to talk briefly about Decult, because I feel like you've gone all in, You wrote this book, you started Decult, we're off to the International Cultic Studies Association annual conference in Montreal next week. Like, why? Why go all in on this topic?
All right, well, you can ask my therapist.
Why to the point where you've started your own conference?
And again, it comes back to children from cults. Because when my book came out in 2022, I thought, I'm done with cult journalism. Honestly, it's taken it out of me. I've done all these big investigations, especially as a freelancer, where you only get paid per word. It's just not sustainable. I was emotionally worn out. I had these real problems from it. And I thought, okay, but now it's all in a book. People can read it. I don't have to do all this again. And then I got emails and messages from former children in cults, because they really resonate with, even though I write not about their cult, but they resonate with the theme and the harm and the trauma and the sexual abuse especially, and the not talking to the parents and all these things. And they contacted me, and they saw me as a to-go-to person, and they wanted to tell me their story, or they wanted to know if I could recommend a therapist, or they basically just wanted help, and they saw me as someone who could give them that support, because clearly there's such a lack of those services in New Zealand and around the world. But in New Zealand, we don't have anything like a anti-cult organization. We don't have, or we didn't have, trained cult counselors yet, and so on. So I had only been to an international cult conference once before in the UK, and I found it really interesting. And then this spontaneous idea came up over coffee with a friend of mine who runs a kind of like a theater like this, but a little bit bigger, and she puts on all sorts of events. She said, Anke, do you have any ideas? And it just came out of me, said, hey, we should have a cult conference. She said, sure, I love it. And anyway, she jumped ship later. It was too much work, and I just carried on. And this is actually where it came from. Well, how can we get this topic out into the open, and how can I bring all these experts to New Zealand and help to create better services? So it was this crazy idea, actually, and I'm a good networker, I think. I was an executive producer for a talk show, interview show in Germany back in the day, so I thought I was probably quite good at putting a program together and find the right people for the show, so to speak. I had no idea, though, what it means actually organizing a whole conference and starting a charity, and we have still no funding. And so, yeah, it's been quite a ride. And you said, yeah, I'm all in. It's true. And sometimes I have to also ask myself, am I in too much? This is going to be my life for the rest of the life. And I'm still very passionate about it, while at the same time, it's got to be more sustainable. I'm gonna find a way to not burn myself out and find a good balance, and hopefully also find some funding that we're not just all working for free for this cause.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Anke? Yes, hello.
With hope for doing better in the future, now that everyone's learning more about this, do you have advice for how people can stay grounded in their own principles of child safety, or things that they can try to hold on in themselves as their anchors so they're not pulled into an abusive organization?
You are with here as a representative of Kid Power. Thank you, Amy. You'd probably answer that better than I can. Like, what can people do to do you mean so that they're not pulled into an organization where children are not safe, or that they don't become unsafe for children? How do you mean?
When you're engaging with an organization that you're going into for all the right reasons,
Right.
but it's starting to get a little bit culty and a little bit weird and maybe exploitative. What can we, I guess kind of answering the question, like, we need to have that North Star of child protection, and just realizing that it's just absolutely not okay for anyone to be exploited, especially children who can't even choose to be there or not. But I'm just curious to hear from you and from Janja, like, for people who are going down a path again with all the right intentions, how can you check yourself?
Do you want to answer to that? as
Well,
well?
I think the important thing is to be a little skeptical when you get involved in things, and to ask a lot of questions. And if your questions don't get answered, that's the first sign right there, run out the door.
But so many people don't want to even hear the answers because they've already invested in being there. You see, it gets really messy.
Yeah, but she's talking about just personally getting involved.
Okay.
Right. So I think, I sort of use this analogy of buying a car. Like, we don't buy the first car we look at, right? We test them all out. We drive them around. We look at that blue book or whatever it's called, and we ask people, oh, you owned a Honda, did you like it, whatever. People don't do that when they sign on to these groups or these large group awareness trainings or these management programs or whatever. It's like your friend says, oh, come to this thing. They go, and it's like, boom, or, they see an ad and they go, oh, yeah, this sounds great. We have to be more careful. We have to be more cautious, and we have to ask the questions. If it's an organization where the leader is the be-all and end-all, you don't want to be there. If there's no transparency, if you don't know how the money is earned, if you don't know where the money is going, if there's not an accountability structure, there's ways that you can ask these questions and find out. And looking in the case that, what's her name, Ava? What's your name?
Amy.
Amy. Amy? Yeah, Amy. Yeah, in terms of children, how are the children in the group treated? Are there children in the group? I think it's just a matter of going into something with our eyes open and not being incredibly naive. And I think the issue is that these groups are very good at recruiting, and they're very good at finding the people who want to be in their particular organization, right? So you're not going to join something that doesn't resonate with you, right? Like I always say, I could never have joined a meditation cult. I can't sit still that long. But a political cult, and we were going to have the revolution, oh, that was for me. I was all in, right? So the message has to resonate with you, and that's the first click. And then you get a little bit enamored, and they're very good at drawing you in, and they do the love bombing thing, and everybody's your friend. And so everybody just needs to slow down. Like, slow down, don't jump right in, take your time. Doesn't matter if your best friend is already in, they probably made a mistake. Like, just take it easy and slow down.
It's so hard, though, because it's kind of like falling in love. And, do you rationally fall in love? No, it's some kind of chemistry. You're on an emotional high. Your brain chemistry changes. It's very similar. And the last thing you want to hear if you're in a new love affair is someone else saying, yeah, but that new guy you're dating, I heard some pretty dodgy things about him. You're probably going to cut that friend off instead of not getting the good juju from it anymore. It's very, very similar. There are studies on the limerence on all of this. And also I think a lot of people think if they go into something, into a new group, and it feels so good, and that's a sign it can't be cut because it feels so good. And I'm like, that's when you should be really you should really, you really need to take a step back and check yourself. If you're so enamored with this, you're probably going to have blind spots, and there is probably too much love bombing going on. If suddenly they're all your new best friends over one, after one big ecstatic dance weekend or whatever, and you think you found relationships here with it over a weekend that you haven't had all your life, yeah, that feels great. I get it, but that's actually a red flag in itself. So what seems so good is actually, and that's so difficult because that's not what people associate with something bad. There isn't the barbed wire and their passports are taken away and there's some sinister person with a, sitting there, and then there's satanic chanting or all these cliches about cults. Is usually 99% not what the cults look like that we should be worried about today.
Yeah, of course it's not scary from the beginning, because then no one would join the cult. Like, people say it's this huge mystery that people join cults, but it's not like somebody looks at something, says that looks horrible and scary and awful, I think I want to be a part of it. They see something that resonates with them and they say, hey, that looks good, that matches with something I'm looking into, or with something I think, or something I want to find out more, and then they get into it, and then it slowly turns. So there's something good there. There's something appealing.
I want to add one thing to Amy's question about the kids. So the groups that I explored, or the one that I was mostly in ISTA, at the time it had nothing to do with the kids. It was for adults only. So this is why it took me very long to even make the connection with some of the similarities in their philosophy and their and everything to some of the sex cars that I was researching. And I think it's a bit of a red flag if you look at some groups, like whether it's Landmark, and I hope they're not going to sue me for saying this, because they are very litigious, another marker of cults, and ISTA and a few others, these groups that suddenly branch out to the youth and they run youth programs. Because they think, oh, what if our young people could learn this early on? And I'm guilty of that too. When I was all in ISTA, I wanted my 20-year-old son to do this. I thought, wow, wouldn't this be amazing if every young person could do this kind of training and about conscious sexuality, and it would be so much better than the kind of mediocre sex ed they get at school, and that doesn't really address how beautiful it all could be, and blah, blah, blah. I had this idealized idea of how good it would be if more young people would do this. And now I'm quite taken aback seeing how ISTA has, was planning, I think, to put on trainings for families and bring young people into this. And I've heard some, I'm not going to go into details, but there are definitely some alarming things that I now I'm aware of, where it crosses over in what Sarito knows from Rajneesh and what I know from Centerpoint. And of course, if you're so aware of the worst end of it all, if you know the worst case scenarios, it's really hard to just sort of innocently just embrace a group that just wants to create something better for the kids, right? You think, oh God, this has all been done before and it didn't end so well. And yeah, how to find that balance for these idealistic people who want to do something for their communities that I think is beneficial, but who haven't really learned from the mistakes of the past.
Okay, one more. You.
We talked about the definition of a cult, and we just went over like one of the red flags, which is, being so overjoyed and you're kind of getting into it. But what are some other red flags?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to that because I have a little workshop. It's called How Not to Start a Cult, and I talk about these red flags. There's some big ones and there's some smaller ones, and often it's just an accumulation of too many of them. I think a really big one is, Janja touched on that a bit, I think, if you start questioning yourself for not understanding something and not the program or the teacher, and I've seen this again and again, people they're explaining something and everyone gets with the program and everyone else seems to get it and you don't. And instead of being that person back who says, that mumbo jumbo doesn't make sense to me. Can you explain that again, Guru, whatever, G? But you can't do that because you'd feel really stupid. And you want to get your money's worth for, you want to be as evolved as all the others who seem to get it, and maybe they're just faking it too. Mm-hmm. So that's a really red flag. When you question yourself, you think you're too stupid, you're not evolved enough, you didn't get it, you need to pray harder or meditate more or whatever the modality is. Another one is the us versus them thinking, as typical for any cults, and you might not get this as strongly as, say, a cult that lives on a compound and never has contact with the outside world, or as extreme as it was in Rajneeshpuram, but you could have it on a minor level where it's just this elitism of we do the best yoga, all the others are just, or our neo-tantric shamanic school is this is the real deal. This is, if you really want to advance in that world, you got to do that kind of training. That elitism
Kind of arrogance.
The arrogance, yeah, it's a red flag. Obviously, teachers having sex with students, adult students, adults, not just, yeah. That crossing, that is such a massive red flag. And even if they're not having sex, just having favorites, being flirty with someone, offering them special time afterwards. Oh gosh, there's so much more. There's actually a great document online where you can read up on it all. It's called Red Flags and Workshops. It's really good because there's a whole list. There's also orange flags and so it's and yellow flags, and maybe what for some people is a really big red flags, for others like, yeah, it's okay. Mm-hmm.
So how are we doing on time? Is it too late to take an intermission, or it's too late? Okay. Well, we will just power through then. This is Janja Lalich. She is the director of the Lalich Center for Research on Influence and Control. She's a professor emerita of Chico State, and she has authored many books, including Take Back Your Life, also Escaping Utopia, which focuses on children who grew up in cults. She is kind of a go-to for information about cults and extreme groups, and I'm really happy to have her here today to talk to us.
Thanks, Dhyana.
Thank you for being here. So I was hoping you could talk to us about the cult you experienced that got you into this whole thing.
Oh, okay. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I was in a left-wing political cult that was headquartered in San Francisco in the 70s and 80s. I was 30 when I joined, so I was not a kid. I wasn't naive. I had already had a college degree. I'd lived in Europe for a number of years. So I moved back to America after living in Spain for 4 years. So I was new in town. I was coming out as a lesbian. I had, all these different vulnerabilities. And I got invited to join a study group. It was a time of, if any of you were around then, a lot of movements were happening. The feminist movement was happening, the gay liberation movement, the Puerto Rican this movement, the Black Panthers. I mean, it was like a very, very, very active time. So I got invited to join a study group that was called Women in the State, where we were going to study the role of women in the state, or the role of the state against women, or whatever. And so that sounded cool. I thought I'll meet new people. And so I joined the study group, and other people I knew were also being asked to join the study group. So it seemed very safe. And so what we were doing in the study group was reading like the main revolutionary literature by Lenin, by Stalin, by Mao, by the guy from Vietnam, all the communist leaders, right? And so after a few weeks, they met with me. The person who was recruiting me met with me again and said, oh, well, what are you, do you like the study group? I'm like, yeah. She said, well, what are you learning? And I said, well, it seems obvious that if we want to make change, we have to have a democratic centralist organization. And she said, oh, yeah. She said, well, what if I told you we have one? And I'm like, oh, what? So they said they had this organization that was multinational, and it was huge, and it was this and that, and but it was very secretive because this was also the time they were looking for Patty Hearst, and a lot of stuff was going on here. The Red Squad is in some, I see heads nodding, so you know what I'm talking about. So she said, well, if you want to join, you have to fill out this questionnaire, and then we'll get back to you, which is this bait and switch that they use. So I filled out the questionnaire, which meant they then knew everything about me. And then they came back a few weeks later and said, you've been admitted, and so that was wonderful. And then all the rules came, like, okay, now you're in. So you have to change your name. You can't tell anybody. You have to keep your phone plugged in at all times in case you're needed. You're basically on call 24 hours a day. And I was given all these different assignments. And so very quickly it became my whole life. I was just working part-time because I wanted to be a writer. So I had a lot of free time. And they immediately appointed me secretary to the Central Committee. So this felt like a real honor, like, oh, wow, they think I'm really cool. And like and so I'd sit in on these Central Committee meetings hearing this insane stuff. And then I was supposed to go home and type up the minutes. In those days, we had carbon paper. So I had to type really hard and make 8 copies and then deliver them in the morning before they all woke up. So that made me feel really special. And over time, I went up in the ranks, and I was top leadership most of the time. And I was an absolute bitch. And we were a very, very strict and abusive organization. We spent most of our time sitting around in circles criticizing somebody. And the criticisms weren't easy, and they weren't nice, and they weren't kind. And so people were just decimated over and over and over for either for something they did or for something that was made up that they did. And we had a saying that came from Chairman Mao that said, in any criticism, there is always a kernel of truth. So that meant no matter what you were criticized for, you had to accept it because there was that kernel of truth, right? So that really lent to this idea of sort of black is white and white is black. So I'll give you an example. At one point, I was sent to New York to raise money from one of our contacts, and I was supposed to ask him for like $1 million, which was insane. I mean, it was whatever the equivalent was at that time. But so I went to New York, and I met this person, and we had lunch, and so I asked him for the $1 million, and he looked at me like I was nuts. And of course, I didn't get it, and I was like terrified to go back to tell them I didn't get the $1 million, but then I flew back to California. And the next day, I was put on trial. We would have trials where someone would sit like this in front of all of you, and you would criticize this person for hours and hours and hours, right? And the charges against you would be read. So these were sort of modeled on the Russian purge trials, if you know what that is. So the next day I was put on trial, and the charge was that I went to New York and asked this man for $1 million, which was my assignment, right? Now, I couldn't sit there and say, wait a minute, that's what they told me to do. Like, you couldn't do that. So black is white and white is black, right? So I had to just sit there, and everybody's like berating me for doing this thing that I had been asked to do, and then I had to go write a criticism, self-criticism, blah, 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 blah. So that went on for like 10 years, and we had anywhere from 100 to, I don't know, maybe 700 people at the max. What do y'all think, 700? At one point, we sent people around the country. We had stations in different cities. And the leader. So the leader was a drunk. She was a sociology professor.
So sorry to interrupt.
So what?
I want to talk more about your work.
Oh, okay.
So the cult, I know that it kind of fell apart at one point.
Yeah, the cult. We actually finally had our revolution, and we overthrew our leader. So.
Yes, good. And then you became an expert in cults.
A little bit by accident.
So I wanted to talk about the book that I keep mentioning, Escaping Utopia. After studying so many aspects of people's experiences in cults, what made you personally want to delve into this particular niche of the topic, children raised in cults?
Right. So, as Dhyana said, I was very involved in the cult awareness movement and had already written a few books. After I got out of the cult, 10 years later, I went to grad school and got my PhD. It took me 10 years to make that decision. So I'd written a few books. I'd written Take Back Your Life, which is a basic recovery book. I published my dissertation, which is my theory about what happens to people in cults and why we do what we do. And then I was going to all the cult conferences at the time and things like that. So I was at a conference in, I think, 2003, and there were children from cults at that conference who were on a panel from Children of God mostly, which is one of the worst cults in the world. Yours was bad too, but they were up there from Children of God for sure. And I was just blown away, like it was the first time I'd even thought about children in cults. I mean, seriously. So after they were done, I met with them and talked with them, and I went home and I thought, Jesus Christ, this is people need to know what goes on with children in cults. So I started a research project, which took a long time because I was teaching full time. But I ended up interviewing 65 individuals who were in 39 different cults in, I think, 5 different countries, both men and women. And they had all left the cult on their own, meaning without their family or without any assistance. And they left at various ages. So some of them were still quite young, and some of them were in their 60s when I interviewed them, but they had grown up in a cult. And so this is what's in this book, is sort of the outcome of that research, which basically is a lot of what we were talking about here today. The fact that when they leave, a lot of times people don't even know their real name. They don't have a birth certificate. They don't know if they have any relatives on the outside, and they're just like, boom. And almost every one of them said, I felt like I landed from Mars, right? So here they were in the outside world. Sometimes, depending on how seclusive their group was, they didn't have a clue how to exist. They didn't know anything about the educational system. They didn't know we had such a thing as a GED, because most of them had either had no schooling or had been homeschooled by the cult, which meant all they did was study the cult leaders' bullshit. So they didn't have educational records or diplomas. They didn't know how to write a resume. They didn't know what the internet was. They didn't, it was like boom. And so, as we said, people ended up couch surfing, living on the streets, getting into drugs, not knowing where to go. We as a society have absolutely no resources for this growing population. The young people are leaving, or not young, whatever age, are leaving these groups in droves, and there is nothing for them. They can go to a domestic violence shelter and they'll get turned away because they don't qualify. Right? And so it's just tragic. And the suicide rate is something like 10 times the normal suicide in the general population. I mean, it's just horrendous. But also the resilience is amazing. So the stories of the people in here and how they survived and how they managed to carry on, and the things that they said, like one of the things that also came out was that every single one of them said, no matter how hard it was out in the world, they never once thought of going back. So that really tells you something, right? And most of them said that they were really surprised how nice people were in the outside world, because as Sarita's been saying, you're trained to think the outside world is terrible and everybody's awful and you're going to die when you go out there and all this kind of stuff. And there's just some really wonderful little tidbits in here. Like there's a woman who went grocery shopping for the first time. She'd grown up in Children of God, and she was like, standing in the grocery store, like looking at all these like types of cereals and jam. And she's like, had never had jam before. And she bought like 15 bottles of jam and took them home. And she had this roommate who thought she was completely crazy because she just kept stuffing the refrigerator with jam. But this was like such a thing for her. And using a hairdryer. She'd never seen a hairdryer before. So just all these little things that we take for granted every day is just like a huge discovery for people. So anyway, I think it's a great book. It was published in 2017. It is still the only published research about children and cults. There has been no other research done that I can find about children and cults, which is shocking. So if any of you are in school or know anyone who's going to school, graduate school, we need more and more research. It's one of the things I really pressed when I was in New Zealand at the conference. We need more solid research, and especially about what happens to children in cults, because it is the key population right now.
They did one study in 2010 in New Zealand about the children from Centrepoint. It was called A Different Kind of Family. You can still find it online, and yeah, pretty sad results about the rate of sexual abuse, but also the emotional neglect and what you said about the not finding a place in the world outside afterwards. And these are kids who actually went to public schools and still they live this sort of double life, and then being like a refugee from another country. And it just seems to be the same common themes. It doesn't matter which groups.
What type of group? Yeah.
It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, these people were from everything from a fundamentalist Christian cult to New Age to whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's the same stuff.
And some of them are really great advocates these days. So at the DICA conference, where, by the way, Janja was our keynote speaker, came all the way from California to New Zealand for the first time and did an amazing job, and we took her to Parliament and whatnot. And some of the most, apart from Janja, but some of the most impressive speakers who'd never gone public before were former kids from cults. Yeah. And they've really found their voice since, and it's just so great to see the empowerment, the advocacy, the learning. I mean, look, Sarito, you were so educated, and you didn't come from an environment where that was encouraged. And I'm just so impressed with all these former kids against all odds who found their voice, who put out amazing books or make videos or speak at events and raise awareness around this. They're my heroes, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was going to wrap this up with some more questions, and we did want to do some book signing as well. So, yes, you.
Excellent. What's the issues that are being raised tonight? I've become interested in the bystander psychology of all of this. I read a study recently that 82% of children reported their abuse to an adult, and they were dismissed or not believed or made the problem. And these narcissistic leaders that lead situations like this, they can't get away with crime without others knowing about it. And I wonder, we're a long ways in our legal system from holding people to account for knowing about stuff. But I just wondered if any of you have any comments about bystander psychology and those who know what's going on but do nothing when children are being hurt.
Well, I mean, I would just say this is the whole issue of moral injury, that, all of us in cults are victims as well as perpetrators. And when we leave, that's really probably the hardest part of our recovery, because either we did things that were against our moral code or we saw things that we couldn't do anything about. Yeah. So holding those people accountable, I guess, is what you're getting at. I mean, I say let's hold the perpetrators accountable first. Yeah. Luckily, I don't know, most of the cases that we've been able to bring to court, we've been successful because they were federal cases of either sex trafficking or human trafficking. And sometimes that involved the children, or child pornography, like Keith Raniere was got on child pornography. It's really, really, really difficult to get any kind of legal action. I mean, I've worked with groups of people who had evidence up the wazoo, and the FBI just turned away. They don't care. They just don't care. And so trying to get any kind of legal help, there have been some successes. I'd say the most successful has been sexual abuse of women in just straight out sexual abuse cases. But it's really difficult, and I would say for sure in our country right now, it's going to become even more difficult. So yeah, it's a hard problem. Yeah.
I appreciate your response.
I'm so sorry to everyone who didn't get a chance to ask questions. We have run out of time, but we're going to have a book signing, so hopefully you can ask your questions directly to our authors. So I think we're going to start that now. So we're going to do that. Thank you so, so much for being here. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to this live recorded episode of Generation Cult that took place on stage at the Lost Church San Francisco on June 26th. Special thanks to Brett Klein, co-founder and executive director of the Lost Church, as well as the rest of the staff there for all of their work. We had a great night. It went late. We so appreciated everyone who bought tickets and showed up to this event in North Beach in the city. All music is by the band The Chaw, which is local to the San Francisco Bay Area. You should check them out. They're really good. Editing and hosting is by me, Dhyana Levey. Stage recording was by Peter Clark. Other setup was by Brett Klein and Lost Church staff. Bartending by Johnny Tripod. Photography by Laura Casey and Nick Roethlisberger.